The Gala of Broken Promises. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories, where we bring you tales that remind you of your worth, your power, and the miracle that happens when pain turns into strength. Today's story begins on a night that was meant to be just another elegant social event, but became the turning point in a woman's life. Her name was Olivia Carter, and she was about to walk into a ballroom that would test her courage, dignity, and heart like never before. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the city glittering under streetlights that shimmered across puddles like broken glass. Olivia stood before her mirror in the suite of a grand old hotel downtown, her reflection both strong and fragile. The emerald dress she wore clung to her gracefully, its silk fabric glinting softly under the warm light like a calm lake under moonlight. She had picked it carefully, not for glamour but for symbolism, green, the color of renewal and quiet hope. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath as she clasped a delicate silver pendant around her neck, the same one her grandmother had given her the day she graduated college. That small anchor had always reminded her that storms pass, that roots matter, that she was more than what the world tried to make her believe. It had been 6 long months since Derek Ashford, the man she once believed she'd marry, shattered her heart and reputation in one breath. Their engagement had ended not in silence but in whispers that filled the city's social circles, carried by those who delighted in seeing a woman from a modest background daring to love a man born into old wealth. Olivia had tried to heal quietly. She threw herself into her work at the Children's Literacy Foundation, painting again, volunteering, finding light where it had been lost. But healing was never linear. Some days strength felt like armor, and some nights memories felt like chains. So when Derek himself had called her 3 weeks ago, his voice smooth and confident, inviting her to the annual Ashford family gala, saying it was time to show society they had both moved on, Olivia hesitated. Deep down she knew he didn't want peace, he wanted power. Yet she said yes. She wanted to face him, not for closure but for herself, to prove that she was no longer afraid of the man who once broke her. Now, standing in that hotel room, she felt the old fear stir inside her, but she refused to let it control her. She picked up her clutch, squared her shoulders, and whispered to her reflection, "You've already survived worse." The Ashford estate loomed like something out of a storybook, grand, ancient, intimidating. Its marble columns and glowing chandeliers were a symbol of inherited privilege, the kind that never had to earn its confidence. Olivia's driver pulled up the long circular driveway lined with luxury cars that sparkled under the golden lights. She stepped out and for a brief moment she felt every gaze turn her way. Perhaps it was the confidence in her posture, or maybe the quiet defiance in her eyes, but heads turned. The whispers began, and soft, sharp, familiar. She had expected them. She had come prepared for them. Inside, the ballroom was breathtaking. The chandeliers glittered like frozen rain, and a soft quartet played in one corner while the air shimmered with perfume and expensive laughter. People danced, smiled, and gossiped, their perfect lives arranged like polished diamonds. Olivia moved through the crowd gracefully, every step deliberate, every smile controlled. She caught glimpses of faces she once knew, women who had once congratulated her on her engagement, now watching her with veiled curiosity, men who nodded politely, unsure whether to greet her or pretend she didn't exist. She ignored them all. She went straight to the refreshment table, her fingers tightening around her glass of sparkling water. Then he appeared, Derek Ashford, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that whispered money and arrogance, crossed the room like he owned it. His smile was smooth, his posture confident, but Olivia saw through it now, saw the man behind the charm, the manipulation behind the politeness. "Olivia," he greeted, his voice calm but dripping with condescension. "How good of you to come. I wasn't sure you'd have the courage." His words were soft but sharp enough to cut. She smiled back politely. "I've never lacked courage, Derek. Some of us don't need an audience to prove it." His jaw twitched. And before he could respond, he turned to greet someone else, leaving her standing there with the bitter taste of their history still in the air. The evening dragged on painfully. Olivia smiled when she had to, nodded through conversations she barely heard, and ignored the lingering stares. She told herself she was fine, but the walls of that ballroom seemed to close in with every passing minute. Then came the moment that would change everything. Derek stepped onto the small stage where the quartet had been playing, his glass raised in hand, his smile wide. The crowd hushed instantly. He began his speech with false humility, thanking his guests for their support, talking about growth and second chances. But then his tone shifted, his eyes finding hers across the room. "Some of you," he said with mock warmth, "may remember that I was once engaged. A mistake, really, but one that taught me a great deal about maturity." The words hit her like cold rain. The crowd chuckled, sensing drama. Olivia's heart pounded. Derek continued, pretending to be reflective but twisting each word like a knife. "I nearly married someone who simply didn't understand what it takes to live in our world. Sweet girl, truly, but love doesn't change class, does it?" The laughter that followed was cruel. "Some people," he said, pausing for effect, "no matter how hard they try, will always be ordinary." That single word, ordinary, echoed in her chest like a gunshot. Her vision blurred. The world around her became a dull roar of laughter, whispers, and pity. Every insecurity she had buried clawed its way back to the surface. But before she could lower her head or walk away, movement caught her eye. A man at the far end of the ballroom, tall, composed, yet visibly tense, was watching Derek with cold anger in his eyes. He looked out of place among the polished aristocrats, his presence commanding but quiet. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to carry both strength and empathy. He wasn't watching Olivia the way others did, not with pity, not with amusement, but with something else entirely. Recognition, understanding. As if he knew what it was like to stand alone in a room full of people waiting for you to break. Before Olivia could process it, the man placed his glass down firmly and began to move. Each step he took seemed to part the crowd. Murmurs rose like wind through leaves. Derek faltered on stage, surprised by the disturbance. The man stopped beside Olivia, his presence calm but magnetic. He looked at her first, gently, reassuringly, then turned toward Derek. His voice was deep, smooth, but edged with controlled fury. "You speak of growth," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yet you humiliate a woman to feed your ego. That isn't growth, Mr. Ashford. That's cowardice." The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Derek's expression darkened. "And who exactly do you think you are?" He spat, his pride cracking. The stranger straightened. "Julian Harrington," he said simply. The name sent a ripple through the crowd. Even Olivia had heard of him, the self-made tech millionaire who had built an empire without inherited wealth, the man who had famously refused to sell to the Ashford family. "And unlike you," Julian continued, his tone steady, "I don't use people to prove my worth." He turned to Olivia again, his voice soft now, barely audible over the stunned silence. "You deserve better than this," he said. And before she could even breathe, before the crowd could gasp, Julian stepped forward, gently took her face in his hands and kissed her. Time stopped. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, flashing cameras, but Olivia heard nothing. The world fell away until all that existed was the warmth of his touch and the unspoken message behind that kiss. You are not small. You are not broken. You are seen. For the first time in months, she felt something powerful. Not shame, not anger, but worth. When Julian finally pulled back, he looked into her eyes with quiet certainty. You don't have to stay here, he said softly. Not tonight, not ever again. And just like that, he extended his hand. Olivia hesitated only for a moment before taking it. Together they walked through the crowd, past the shocked faces, past Derek's stunned silence and out into the cool night. The murmurs behind them rose like a storm, but neither looked back. As they stepped outside, the city lights glowed brighter than the chandeliers they had left behind. The air smelled of rain and freedom. At the bottom of the marble steps, Julian released her hand, giving her space. I'm sorry if that was too much, he said, his voice gentler now. I didn't plan it, I just couldn't watch you be torn down like that. Olivia shook her head slowly, still breathless, still lost in disbelief. Why, she whispered. Why would you risk your reputation for someone you don't even know? He smiled faintly. Because I do know. I know what it feels like to be treated as less than what you are. And sometimes all it takes is one person to remind you that you're more. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks, the stars faint but steady above. Olivia didn't know what the future held, whether this man was a stranger, a savior, or something in between. But for the first time in months, she felt alive. She felt seen, and somewhere deep in her heart, she knew this night wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The stranger who changed everything. The city was still half asleep when the first pale glow of dawn spilled across the skyline, softening the harsh edges of skyscrapers and turning glass towers into sheets of rose-gold light. Olivia Carter stood by the tall windows of her apartment, a cup of coffee growing cold in her trembling hands, watching the sunrise as if it could explain the chaos that had unfolded only hours before. The events of the gala replayed in her mind in slow motion. Derek's cruel words, the stunned crowd, the sudden appearance of Julian Harrington, and that impossible, breathtaking kiss that silenced an entire ballroom. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his hands, the calm strength in his voice when he said she didn't have to endure humiliation anymore. That moment had rewritten something inside her. It had broken the last link to the shame that Derek had left behind. Now, as sunlight poured through her windows, Olivia wondered if it had really happened or if her mind had conjured the perfect rescue out of desperation. Her phone was proof enough that it had been real. Dozens of notifications blinked across the screen. Messages, missed calls, news alerts, social media mentions. The world had seen it. Mystery millionaire defends humiliated ex-fiancé. Tech tycoon Julian Harrington kisses woman at Ashford. Gala. Society scandal of the year. She scrolled through the headlines with a mixture of dread and disbelief. She hadn't asked for attention. She wanted peace, dignity, silence. But now her name was everywhere. Her image captured mid-shock as Julian's lips brushed hers under the chandeliers. Her pulse quickened. She turned the phone face down on the table. A soft knock on her door startled her. She froze, heart racing, half expecting reporters. But when she opened it, a familiar face greeted her. Samantha Hale, her oldest friend and colleague at the Children's Literacy Foundation. Samantha rushed in with that mixture of concern and excitement only a best friend could manage. "Liv, you're all over the internet," she gasped, dropping her bag on the couch. "I saw it on every feed before I even had breakfast. What on earth happened last night? Did that man really just kiss you in front of everyone?" Olivia exhaled slowly and nodded, sinking onto the couch. "Yes, and I didn't even know him. He just appeared." Samantha's eyes widened. "Julian Harrington." "The Julian Harrington? The one who turned down the Ashford deal last year?" Olivia nodded again, uncertain. Samantha laughed softly, shaking her head. "Only you could have your heartbreak turned into a national headline by a millionaire with a hero complex." The humor in her tone eased Olivia's tension a little, and for the first time since the gala she managed a genuine smile. Yet beneath that smile unease lingered. The internet could turn fascination into cruelty in minutes. She wasn't ready for the scrutiny. Later that morning, as Olivia tried to distract herself with work emails, her phone vibrated with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Olivia Carter. The voice on the other end was calm, deep, unmistakable. Julian Harrington. Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she managed. There was a short pause, almost hesitant, before he continued. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Last night, I realize it must have been overwhelming." Overwhelming was an understatement. She leaned against the counter, clutching the phone tightly. "I don't even know what to say." "You didn't have to do that." Julian's reply came softly, measured. "I know, but I wanted to. Some things shouldn't be left unchallenged, and you didn't deserve what he did." His sincerity washed over her like a warm current. It wasn't charm. It was conviction. He cleared his throat almost awkwardly. "There's a storm brewing online. I imagine it's unpleasant. If it gets too much, my PR team can help manage the noise. No strings attached." Olivia smiled faintly despite herself. "You seem to have a habit of rescuing people." Julian chuckled, low and genuine. "Maybe just the ones who remind me of who I used to be." They spoke for nearly half an hour. It wasn't flirtation, but understanding. Two strangers linked by a public moment neither had planned. When the call ended, Olivia felt lighter, though she couldn't explain why. She stared at the phone for a long moment, then whispered to herself, "What have you started, Julian Harrington?" Over the next few days, the story refused to fade. Photographs of the gala flooded news sites. Analysts debated whether the kiss had been spontaneous or strategic. Derek's family issued a statement condemning public theatrics, while Julian's company released none at all. The silence from him only fueled the mystery. Olivia, however, avoided every camera, pouring herself into her foundation work. Yet wherever she went, whispers followed, in cafes, at meetings, even among volunteers. It seemed the world had drawn its own conclusions. 3 days later, as Olivia left her office, a sleek black car pulled up beside the curb. A suited driver stepped out and approached her politely. "Miss Carter, Mr. Harrington asked if you'd be willing to join him for coffee. He's waiting nearby." For a moment she considered refusing. She didn't want more attention, more stories, but curiosity and a quiet tug in her chest won. She nodded, and within minutes she was seated in a private corner of a quiet riverside cafe, the morning sun glinting off the water beyond the glass. Julian rose from his chair as she entered, every bit as composed as he had been that night. Dark suit, no tie, the faint trace of exhaustion beneath his calm eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat. "I wanted to apologize. We're in properly this time." She smiled wryly. "Most people send flowers, not international headlines." He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm afraid subtlety was never my strong point." For a while they simply talked. About the gala. About how strange it was to become unwilling symbols of something neither had intended. Then the conversation drifted almost naturally into deeper places. Their work, their beliefs, their mistakes. Julian told her about growing up in a small coastal town, losing his parents young and working night shifts while teaching himself programming. "People see the success," he said quietly, "but not the hunger, not the fear that it could all disappear." Olivia listened, moved by the humility behind his words. In return, she spoke of her childhood, of a mother who taught her kindness mattered more than status, of the children she helped through her foundation. By the time their coffee had gone cold, 2 hours had vanished. As they stepped outside, the breeze carried the scent of rain. Julian turned to her. "You know, for someone the media calls a scandal, you seem remarkably calm." She smiled faintly. "Calm is all I can afford to be. I've already lost my peace once. I won't lose it again." He nodded, admiration flickering across his expression. "If you ever need anything, and professional or otherwise you can reach me directly." He handed her a card, but before she could thank him, his phone buzzed. "Duty calls," he said, apologetic. "But I hope this isn't the last conversation we have." That evening, Olivia found herself staring at the business card long after she got home. Something about his presence had stayed with her. The steadiness, the way he listened without judgment. She placed the card in her desk drawer, but couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were far from finished crossing. 2 weeks passed. The noise around the incident began to die down, replaced by the next wave of gossip and celebrity headlines. Olivia's life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, though small echoes remained. A few kind letters from strangers, an unexpected rise in donations to her foundation, and the occasional headline referring to her as the woman who stood tall. Each time she read those words, she felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Maybe, just maybe, something good had come from humiliation after all. Then one afternoon, an email arrived from Harrington Innovations. It wasn't from Julian himself, but from his team, inviting the Children's Literacy Foundation to partner in a new educational initiative funded by his company. Olivia stared at the message, heart skipping. Was this coincidence or intention? She hesitated, then replied professionally, accepting the invitation to discuss potential collaboration. The meeting was scheduled at Harrington Tower, a sleek skyscraper of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. When she stepped into the lobby, she felt momentarily out of place, her modest dress and worn leather bag against the polished marble and digital displays. But the receptionist greeted her warmly and led her to the top floor, where Julian waited beside a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. He smiled as she entered, that same grounded warmth in his eyes. "I hoped you'd come," he said. "I wanted this project to go through your foundation because I believe in what you're doing. And because I owe you more than an apology. You reminded me that integrity matters more than perception." They spent the next hour reviewing plans, building reading centers for underprivileged children, integrating digital tools, training volunteers. It was ambitious, transformative. As Olivia spoke passionately about her vision, Julian listened with quiet admiration. For him, the partnership wasn't charity. It was respect. When the meeting ended, he walked her to the elevator. "You've changed how I see things," he admitted as the doors opened. "I built an empire chasing power, but you build lives chasing hope. I think that's rarer." Olivia met his gaze, her voice soft but certain. "Hope doesn't need headlines, Julian. It just needs believers." The elevator doors closed between them, but the connection lingered. Weeks turned into months, and their collaboration blossomed. Together, they launched literacy programs, visited schools, and attended charity galas. The same kind of glittering events that once made Olivia feel small, now transformed into platforms for good. The world began to see her not as the woman who'd been humiliated, but as a symbol of resilience. The gossip faded. Respect replaced ridicule. Through it all, Julian remained close, sometimes a partner, sometimes a quiet friend who understood without words. But even as the world applauded their work, a quiet tension grew between them, an unspoken awareness that what had started as a rescue had deepened into something fragile and real. Olivia tried to ignore it, telling herself that gratitude was not love, that she couldn't risk her heart again. Yet every time their hands brushed while reviewing documents, every time his eyes softened when she spoke passionately about children's dreams, she felt that same warmth from the night of the gala returning. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Julian suggested a walk by the riverside near his office. The city lights shimmered on the water, and for a while they walked in silence. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever think about that night?" She looked up at him, startled by the question. "Every now and then," she admitted. "It changed more than just my reputation." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "It changed mine too. I spent years believing that success could protect me from the ugliness of this world. But then I saw what cruelty looked like up close, and I realized how easy it is to become part of it if you don't stand against it." His voice lowered. "When I saw you that night, I didn't see a stranger. I saw the version of myself that once stood humiliated in front of those who thought they owned everything." Olivia's heart ached at the vulnerability in his tone. She took a step closer. "Then you already know that standing up isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are." For a long moment they stood there, city lights reflecting in their eyes, neither speaking, neither needing to. When she finally returned home that night, Olivia realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Derek, not of judgment, not even of love. She had walked through fire and found herself intact, and somewhere deep down she knew that Julian's presence in her life wasn't coincidence. It was fate's way of returning her dignity wrapped in a second chance. The past strikes back. The morning sun stretched across the city like a gentle hand, brushing away the last traces of dawn as life stirred awake. For Olivia Carter, the world had changed quietly over the past few months, not through sudden miracles, but through the slow, steady rhythm of rebuilding. Her days now began with purpose, filled with laughter from children at the literacy centers, stacks of project proposals, and phone calls that didn't make her heart race with anxiety. The scandal that once haunted her name had faded, replaced by something stronger: respect. The world no longer saw her as the woman humiliated by Derek Ashford, but as the woman who rose higher than the cruelty meant to break her. And standing beside her through that transformation was Julian Harrington, steady, protective, brilliant, and unexpectedly human. What had started as an impulsive act of kindness had grown into a bond neither of them could deny. Yet despite the closeness they shared, Olivia still kept a quiet distance in her heart. Julian was a man of immense influence, and though he never treated her as anything less than equal, she feared the glare of the world that came with him. Love, she had learned, could be both light and shadow, and she wasn't sure if her heart was ready to walk under both again. That afternoon, Olivia stood before a group of children at one of their newly opened learning centers. The walls were painted in bright colors, bookshelves lined with stories waiting to be discovered, and laughter filled the air like music. She knelt beside a little girl struggling to read a page aloud and gently guided her finger across the words, smiling when the child's voice steadied. "See," Olivia said softly, "it's not about reading fast. It's about feeling the story." The girl giggled, nodding, and continued bravely. Moments like this filled Olivia with peace, reminders that she had built something meaningful out of what once felt like ruins. Later that evening, as she left the center, her phone buzzed with a message from Julian. "Dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet, just us." Her lips curved into a soft smile. Their dinners had become a rare escape from the demands of their growing partnership. Quiet evenings filled with unspoken affection, laughter, and long conversations about life before success. She texted back a simple "I'd love that." The restaurant Julian chose was a small, elegant place tucked along the riverside, known for its calm atmosphere and discreet service. Candlelight flickered between them as they sat by the window, watching the water shimmer beneath the city lights. "You've been busy," Julian said with a gentle smile. "3 centers this month. You're unstoppable." Olivia chuckled softly. "Maybe I'm just making up for lost time." His eyes softened. "Or maybe you finally realized what you're capable of." They talked easily, laughter flowing between them like music. Yet beneath the calm surface, both felt the quiet tension of emotions left unspoken. When dessert arrived, Julian leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Olivia, I've been meaning to tell you something." Her heart quickened. But before he could continue, a familiar voice sliced through the air like cold steel. "Well, isn't this charming?" The sound froze Olivia where she sat. Slowly, she turned, and there he was. Derek Ashford, impeccably dressed, confidence oozing from every step as he approached their table. For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. It had been months since she'd seen him, but the mere sight of him was enough to stir the ghosts she thought she had buried. Julian's expression hardened, though his posture remained calm. "Mr. Ashford," he said evenly, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Relax, Harrington. I'm not here to cause a scene. I just found it fascinating to see my former fiancé dining so comfortably with the man who made me a laughingstock of high society." Olivia straightened in her chair, her voice cool but controlled. "You did that to yourself, Derek. Julian only stopped you from finishing what you started." For a moment, Derek's charm faltered, revealing a flicker of anger before he regained composure. "Still as dramatic as ever," he said, his tone laced with arrogance. "I came here to talk, Olivia. Privately, if you'd allow it." Julian's hand tightened slightly on the table, protective but restrained. Olivia met Derek's gaze squarely. "Anything you need to say to me, you can say here." Derek smirked, leaning back. "Very well. I've been thinking a lot about the past and about how things ended. Perhaps I was harsh, but I've realized you were never the problem. You were simply unprepared for the life I live. You wouldn't believe the number of people who still talk about you, Olivia. If you'd come back publicly with me, well, we could both rewrite that narrative." The audacity of his words struck her like ice water. Before she could speak, Julian's voice cut through the air, low and sharp. "She doesn't need to rewrite anything, Ashford. The only narrative that exists is the one where she walked away stronger." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Harrington. You might think your name gives you power, but influence fades. She'll tire of your savior act eventually." Olivia rose to her feet, her voice steady and clear. "You mistake me for someone who needs saving, Derek. What Julian did that night wasn't charity. It was respect, something you never understood." For a moment, Derek seemed taken aback by her composure. His mask slipped just long enough for Olivia to see the bitterness beneath. Then he straightened, forcing a cold smile. "You'll regret this, Olivia. This world doesn't forget." He turned and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and the echo of arrogance that once ruled her life. Olivia exhaled shakily and sat back down. Julian studied her quietly, concern shadowing his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her voice trembled slightly. "Yes, I just didn't expect to see him again." Julian's jaw tightened. "He's not worth a second thought. Don't let him back into your peace." But Olivia couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. Derek's words carried a promise she didn't understand yet, one that would soon unfold in ways she couldn't imagine. The next few weeks brought a subtle shift. Strange things began to happen at the foundation. Funding approvals delayed without explanation, media outlets publishing rumors questioning her credibility, anonymous emails suggesting misuse of funds. At first, Olivia dismissed them as coincidence, the natural turbulence of public life. But when one of their major sponsors suddenly withdrew support citing reputation concerns, she realized it wasn't chance. Someone was targeting her. Late one evening, she sat alone in her office, the glow of her desk lamp casting long shadows across the papers scattered before her. She reread the anonymous messages, bile rising in her throat. Each accusation was cruel and baseless, but together they painted a dangerous picture. The timing was too precise, the tone too familiar. Only one person had the motive, Derek. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Julian. "Still at the office?" he asked. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Something's wrong, Julian. Someone's trying to discredit the foundation." Within half an hour he was there, standing in her office, his expression unreadable as he studied the evidence. "He's trying to drag you down because he can't stand that you rose without him," Julian said finally, his voice tight with anger. "But he doesn't realize who he's dealing with anymore." Over the following days, Julian's team began to investigate discreetly. Through his contacts, they traced the leaks to a PR firm quietly funded by one of Derek's business partners. Proof came in the form of emails, contracts, and transactions, all pointing back to Ashford. When Julian showed Olivia the evidence, her hands trembled, not from fear but from fury. "He's trying to destroy everything we've built," she whispered. Julian reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "Then we won't let him. But Olivia, we'll fight this smartly, not with vengeance but with truth." His calm steadiness grounded her. Together they decided to address the attacks publicly, not with defensive statements but through transparency. Olivia held a press conference, her voice steady as she laid out the facts, showing every record, every report, every result their foundation had achieved. "We exist for the children who believe in dreams," she said firmly. "And dreams deserve the truth." Her honesty struck a chord. The tide turned almost instantly. Public sympathy returned, and even the media that had once fed on scandal now praised her integrity. Meanwhile, the investigation quietly reached the authorities. Within weeks, Derek's name began surfacing in reports linking him to unethical business practices. His empire, built on image, began to crack. One evening, as Olivia stood on the terrace of the foundation's new headquarters watching the sunset, Julian joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. The sky burned in shades of orange and gold, the city glowing beneath it like molten light. "You faced him," Julian said quietly, handing her a cup. "Not at the gala, not in public, but where it mattered, with grace." She smiled faintly. "I used to think strength meant fighting back. Now I know it just means not letting them change who you are." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind soft around them. Then Julian turned to her, his expression gentle. "Olivia, I've watched you walk through fire and never lose your light. You've changed the way I see the world and the way I see myself." His voice lowered, earnest and unguarded. "I told myself I stepped into your life out of anger that night, but that's not the truth. I stayed because somewhere between those battles I began to care. More than I should have, more than I planned to." Her breath caught. For a long moment she said nothing, the words settling between them like something sacred. Then she whispered, "Julian, you don't owe me anything. You already gave me back my dignity." He shook his head slightly. "It's not about owing, Olivia. It's about wanting. I want to be where you are. Not because you need me, but because I need the kind of peace you carry." Emotion welled in her chest, raw and real. "You saw me at my lowest," she said softly. "And instead of pity, you gave me strength." "How do I thank you for that?" Julian smiled faintly. "By never letting anyone dim that strength again." As night fell over the city, Olivia realized that this chapter of her life, born from humiliation and rebuilt through resilience, had brought her to a truth far deeper than revenge or redemption. The man who once tried to destroy her had faded into his own downfall, while the man who stood by her had become her mirror, reflecting not her wounds, but her worth. In the quiet that followed, as the city lights shimmered like scattered stars below, Julian reached for her hand. No grand gestures, no dramatic words, just a shared understanding that whatever had begun as chance was now destiny unfolding. Slow and certain, and for the first time in years, Olivia Carter felt the peace of a woman who had reclaimed not just her story, but her heart. When love finds its voice, the city glimmered beneath a velvet sky as Olivia Carter stood by the window of her apartment, her reflection framed against the distant sea of lights. She had thought peace would return once Derek's schemes unraveled and truth restored her reputation. Yet peace felt different now, quieter, deeper, yet uncertain, as if her heart was learning to beat to a new rhythm. Months had passed since that night on the terrace when Julian Harrington's words had brushed the edges of a confession, leaving her heart trembling between gratitude and something far stronger. They had grown closer through shared purpose and silent understanding, bound by more than partnership. What lived between them was something unspoken but undeniable, a current that seemed to hum beneath every conversation, every look, every shared silence. Her work had flourished. The literacy initiative had expanded beyond anything she had dared to dream. 10 centers across the country, scholarships for hundreds of children, and recognition from international organizations that once overlooked her. Yet behind every success, she felt Julian's quiet presence, always encouraging, always lifting her higher, never asking for anything in return. He was there in every triumph, never taking credit, never letting her forget that she had done this by her own strength. But Olivia knew what her heart refused to voice. His belief in her had become the heartbeat of her courage. That evening, she received a call from him. His tone was calm, though beneath it she sensed something different, an almost hesitant warmth. "I'm hosting a small event tomorrow," Julian said. "Just friends, colleagues, people who've supported our projects. I'd like you to come. It wouldn't feel right without you there." Olivia hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The next night arrived wrapped in the shimmer of late spring. The Harrington estate, though grand, carried a warmth unlike the Ashford mansion that had once suffocated her. The lights were soft, the air filled with laughter and music that felt genuine, not performative. Olivia entered wearing a midnight blue gown that flowed like water, simple yet radiant. Conversations paused as she stepped in, not from gossip this time, but from admiration. Not for beauty alone, but for the quiet confidence she carried now. Julian noticed her immediately. For a moment, he forgot the crowd around him, forgot the music, forgot every pretense of composure. She looked breathtaking, but more than that, she looked free. As she approached, he extended his hand with a smile that reached his eyes. "You came," he said softly. "You asked," she replied, her tone teasing but gentle. As the evening unfolded, they moved through conversations and laughter with an ease that made people watch them with quiet fascination. It wasn't romance that drew attention, but harmony. The seamless way their energies seemed to align. When the speeches began, Julian stepped onto the small stage, his expression thoughtful. "Tonight," he began, "isn't about achievements or numbers. It's about people who choose kindness when the world gives them reasons not to. It's about those who rebuild from what was meant to destroy them." His eyes found Olivia in the crowd, and for a heartbeat, the rest of the room disappeared. Some people remind you what integrity looks like when the world has forgotten the word. They remind you that dignity isn't inherited, it's chosen. I owe that reminder to someone in this room. Whispers rippled softly, but Julian's gaze never wavered from her. "Olivia Carter," he said, his voice low but steady. "Thank you for reminding me that strength can be gentle, and that belief can be the greatest form of love." The words hung in the air, fragile and electric. Applause followed, warm and sincere, but Olivia barely heard it. Her pulse roared in her ears. Her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and something dangerously close to joy. After the speeches, she slipped away to the terrace to steady her thoughts. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. The garden below shimmered under soft lights, the quiet hum of conversation fading behind glass doors. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure if she was ready for the emotions swirling inside. Then she heard his footsteps. When love finds its voice, the city glimmered beneath a velvet sky as Olivia Carter stood by the window of her apartment, her reflection framed against the distant sea of lights. She had thought peace would return once Derek's schemes unraveled and truth restored her reputation, yet peace felt different now. Quieter, deeper, yet uncertain, as if her heart was learning to beat to a new rhythm. Months had passed since that night on the terrace when Julian Harrington's words had brushed the edges of a confession, leaving her heart trembling between gratitude and something far stronger. They had grown closer through shared purpose and silent understanding, bound by more than partnership. What lived between them was something unspoken but undeniable, a current that seemed to hum beneath every conversation, every look, every shared silence. Her work had flourished. The literacy initiative had expanded beyond anything she had dared to dream. 10 centers across the country, scholarships for hundreds of children, and recognition from international organizations that once overlooked her. Yet behind every success she felt Julian's quiet presence, always encouraging, always lifting her higher, never asking for anything in return. He was there in every triumph, never taking credit, never letting her forget that she had done this by her own strength. But Olivia knew what her heart refused to voice. His belief in her had become the heartbeat of her courage. That evening she received a call from him. His tone was calm, though beneath it she sensed something different, an almost hesitant warmth. "I'm hosting a small event tomorrow," Julian said. "Just friends, colleagues, people who've supported our projects. I'd like you to come. It wouldn't feel right without you there." Olivia hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The next night arrived wrapped in the shimmer of late spring. The Harrington estate, though grand, carried a warmth unlike the Ashford mansion that had once suffocated her. The lights were soft, the air filled with laughter and music that felt genuine, not performative. Olivia entered wearing a midnight blue gown that flowed like water, simple yet radiant. Conversations paused as she stepped in, not from gossip this time, but from admiration. Not for beauty alone, but for the quiet confidence she carried now. Julian noticed her immediately. For a moment, he forgot the crowd around him, forgot the music, forgot every pretense of composure. She looked breathtaking, but more than that, she looked free. As she approached, he extended his hand with a smile that reached his eyes. "You came," he said softly. "You asked," she replied, her tone teasing but gentle. As the evening unfolded, they moved through conversations and laughter, with an ease that made people watch them with quiet fascination. It wasn't romance that drew attention, but harmony, the seamless way their energies seemed to align. When the speeches began, Julian stepped onto the small stage, his expression thoughtful. "Tonight," he began, "isn't about achievements or numbers. It's about people who choose kindness when the world gives them reasons not to. It's about those who rebuild from what was meant to destroy them." His eyes found Olivia in the crowd, and for a heartbeat the rest of the room disappeared. Some people remind you what integrity looks like when the world has forgotten the word. They remind you that dignity isn't inherited, it's chosen. I owe that reminder to someone in this room. Whispers rippled softly, but Julian's gaze never wavered from her. "Olivia Carter," he said, his voice low but steady. "Thank you for reminding me that strength can be gentle and that belief can be the greatest form of love." The words hung in the air, fragile and electric. Applause followed, warm and sincere, but Olivia barely heard it. Her pulse roared in her ears, her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and something dangerously close to joy. After the speeches, she slipped away to the terrace to steady her thoughts. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. The garden below shimmered under soft lights, the quiet hum of conversation fading behind glass doors. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure if she was ready for the emotions swirling inside. Then she heard his footsteps. Julian joined her quietly, standing beside her without speaking for a moment. "I didn't mean to embarrass you," he said finally. "I just needed to say what's been sitting inside me for too long." She turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Why now?"
He smiled faintly. "Because I realized something. I can't keep pretending that what I feel is admiration or friendship. It's more than that. It always has been. The confession came with no grand gestures, no dramatics, only honesty. Olivia," he continued, his tone soft but sure. "The night I saw you at that gala standing alone while everyone laughed, something inside me broke. I saw myself in you. The loneliness, the defiance, the quiet dignity of someone who refuses to bow. And I knew even before I crossed the room that my life would change because of you." Olivia's breath trembled. "Julian." He stepped closer, his voice gentler now. "I don't want to be the man who saved you from something. I want to be the man who walks beside you into everything that comes next. I don't need gratitude. I just need truth. Tell me if you feel it too. That pull. That quiet knowing that we were meant to meet when we did." Tears stung her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming tenderness of his words. She looked up at him, her heart laid bare. "I tried not to," she admitted. "I told myself you were just being kind, that I was imagining the connection because I wanted to believe good men still existed. But then every time you looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never have before. You don't look at me like I'm a story you want to fix. You look at me like I am the story." Julian's expression softened, and in that moment the silence between them became a language of its own. Slowly, he reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then don't fight it anymore," he whispered. "Let's see where this goes. Not because we owe each other anything, but because we finally found something worth trusting." For the first time since her heart had been shattered, Olivia didn't hesitate. She took a step closer until there was no distance left between them. Under the soft glow of the terrace lights, she looked up into his eyes and smiled through tears. "You once said you needed someone to remind you what it means to believe again. Maybe that's all either of us ever needed, someone to believe with." He drew her gently into his arms, not with urgency, but with reverence, as if afraid to break the fragile beauty of the moment. The world outside the terrace faded into quiet stillness. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't like the impulsive kiss at the gala that defied humiliation. This was slower, deeper, filled with promise rather than protest. It was not about rescuing or proving. It was about healing. About two people who had walked through pain on separate roads and finally met at the crossroads of peace. When they parted, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "You have no idea how long I've waited to do that properly," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia laughed softly through her tears. "I think I do," she whispered. "I've been waiting too. Not for someone to kiss me, but for someone who meant it." The night stretched around them, serene and endless. Below, the laughter of guests drifted faintly through the garden, but up here they were in their own quiet universe. Neither spoke for a long while. Words felt unnecessary. What existed between them had been building since the moment they met, and now it finally had a name. As the hour grew late, Olivia leaned against the railing, watching the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that all of this, the pain, the humiliation, the loss, and was necessary to bring us here?" Julian followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "I think life has a cruel way of teaching us what truly matters," he said. "We spend so long chasing things that shine until we realize that the real light comes from the people who see us when we're dim." She turned to him with a smile that carried both gratitude and wonder. "You make even broken things sound beautiful." He shrugged lightly. "Maybe because broken things are where the light gets in." As the clock neared midnight, the garden lights dimmed one by one, and the party began to fade into memory. Julian offered to drive her home, but she declined with a gentle smile. "I want to walk. I need to feel this night for a little while longer." He understood and didn't insist. Instead, he walked her to the gate where they paused beneath the golden archway. "Olivia," he said quietly, "whatever happens next, know that you never have to face anything alone again." She reached up, touching his cheek softly. "I know," she said, "but the truth is you didn't complete me, Julian. You reminded me that I was already whole." He smiled, pride and tenderness blending in his eyes. "That's exactly why I love you." Her breath caught. Those 3 words, simple yet eternal, fell between them like a promise. And this time she didn't hesitate. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady, glowing with certainty. When she finally walked away, the night air cool against her skin, Olivia Carter felt something she hadn't felt in years, and not just love, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when the past no longer defines you and the future no longer frightens you. Far behind her, Julian watched until she disappeared into the curve of the street, his heart filled with quiet awe. He had built empires, conquered markets, and faced power struggles that would terrify most men. Yet nothing had ever felt as profound as this, the quiet victory of finding love not in perfection, but in shared imperfection. That night, 2 hearts that had once been strangers to kindness finally found home, not in grand declarations, but in the steady rhythm of belief, respect, and a love that had waited patiently through every storm. The promise of forever. The first morning after that night felt like the beginning of a new season in Olivia Carter's life. The sun filtered through her curtains with a softness that seemed almost deliberate, touching every surface of her apartment as if blessing a new chapter. She stood before her window holding a cup of tea, gazing at a skyline that once reminded her of loneliness and now whispered of possibility. Her heart felt light, but not with the fluttering rush of new romance. It was a calm warmth, a quiet certainty that she was finally standing in the life she had fought for. The memory of Julian's voice still lingered in her mind, the sincerity behind his confession, the steady way he had said "I love you" not as a question or demand, but as a truth he had carried for months. For the first time, love did not scare her. It felt like peace. The following weeks passed in a golden rhythm. The world around them moved fast. Meetings, interviews, expansions, invitations from major organizations. But beneath the surface there was stillness. Olivia and Julian's partnership deepened into something beautiful and effortless. They spent long hours discussing their projects, visiting centers, and sometimes simply sitting together in silence when words felt unnecessary. People noticed their connection, of course. Whispers circulated in the business pages and lifestyle columns, but Olivia no longer feared the gaze of the world. She had learned that public opinion was only a mirror of envy and fascination. Neither could touch her truth. Julian's calm confidence shielded her from the noise, but he never overshadowed her. When he was asked about their relationship during an interview, he simply said, "She reminds me that real success is measured by how much good we leave behind." It was the only statement he ever made, and it silenced every rumor. Yet behind their quiet happiness, new challenges waited. Their foundation's growth caught the attention of powerful investors, some eager to support, others to control. When a major conglomerate offered to merge the literacy initiative into its corporate structure, promising massive funding in exchange for creative control, Julian's business sense told him to decline immediately. But the board of trustees, impressed by the potential scale, urged Olivia to consider. For nights she wrestled with the decision, torn between expansion and integrity. She knew what the merger would mean: glossy publicity and more money, but also compromise, bureaucracy, and the loss of the personal warmth that defined their mission. When she told Julian about her dilemma, he listened silently, then said, "You already know the answer, Olivia. You just need to believe that saying no doesn't mean thinking small. It means protecting what's pure." His words anchored her once again. At the next board meeting, she stood before the panel of investors and politely but firmly declined their offer. Her speech was calm, every word measured. "This foundation was born out of pain turned into purpose," she said. "It belongs to the children whose names will never make the news. It is not for sale." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause from those who understood. News outlets later called it the day integrity won, and Julian watched from the back of the hall with quiet pride. In that moment, he knew that the woman he loved was far stronger than any empire he had ever built. But not everyone celebrated her decision. The same business circles that had once mocked her now began to criticize. Commentators questioned her experience, hinting that emotion had overridden reason. Old rivals of Julian seized the moment, suggesting that his affection for Olivia clouded his judgment. The whispers grew into speculation, the kind of noise that could corrode even the strongest resolve. One evening, while Olivia worked late in her office, she found herself staring at a harsh headline: "The woman behind Harrington, heart or hindrance?" For a long time she sat there in silence, the words echoing in her chest. She wasn't hurt by the doubt itself, but by the reminder that the world always sought to reduce women who stood beside powerful men. She closed her laptop quietly and whispered to herself, "I'm not behind anyone. I walk beside him." The next morning she arrived at Julian's office to find him waiting with 2 coffees and an envelope. "I know you've seen the article," he said gently before she could speak. "Don't let it live rent-free in your mind. I've been in this world long enough to know how it works. They tear down what they can't control." He slid the envelope toward her. Inside was a printed headline of that same article, only now marked with a thick red line across it and his handwritten note: "They can write stories, but only we decide the ending." Olivia laughed softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You always know how to turn storms into sunsets," he smiled. "That's because you taught me how." Weeks turned into months again, and slowly the noise faded. Their work continued to bloom. Together they opened centers in 3 new countries, introduced mobile libraries in rural regions, and created mentorship programs for young writers. Recognition followed: awards, invitations to international conferences, partnerships with educational ministries. But what mattered to them most were the quiet moments: the handwritten letters from children learning their first words, the smiles of parents watching their kids read aloud for the first time, the volunteers who said the foundation had changed their lives. These were their victories, small but infinite. One evening, after a long trip abroad inaugurating new centers, Julian invited Olivia to his coastal home, a place he rarely shared with anyone. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, where waves crashed against dark rocks and the wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, they stood together on the terrace. Julian's eyes held a quiet intensity, as if he had carried something in his heart for too long and had finally decided to let it breathe. "Olivia," he said softly, "you once told me you didn't need saving, that you were already whole. You were right, but even whole hearts deserve a home." He reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet box. Inside lay a simple ring, not extravagant but elegant, a single diamond catching the fading light. "This isn't about completing each other," he said. "It's about continuing together. Will you marry me?" For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Olivia looked at him, her eyes filling with tears that shimmered like glass. She thought of the girl who had once stood trembling in humiliation before a ballroom. The girl who had believed her worth depended on someone else's approval. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that dignity, love, and purpose were never given. They were claimed. She smiled through the tears and whispered, "Yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady but his voice unsteady when he whispered, "You've made me the luckiest man alive." They stayed there long after the sun vanished, the sea turning silver beneath the rising moon. It was not the grand fireworks of fairy tales, but something quieter, deeper, the kind of love that doesn't need to be seen to be believed. News of their engagement spread quickly, and while headlines swirled again, this time the tone was different. The same society that had once mocked now admired. Even Derek Ashford, whose empire had nearly collapsed under investigations, was a forgotten name in the background of their triumph. Olivia never spoke his name again, not out of bitterness but out of peace. Some stories, she realized, are not meant to be rewritten. They are meant to end. Their wedding took place 6 months later in a small garden overlooking the ocean. It was elegant yet intimate. Just family, close friends, and the children from their foundation who lined the aisle holding handmade paper flowers. When Olivia walked toward Julian, wearing a dress of soft ivory silk and carrying a single white rose, every memory of pain seemed to dissolve in the sunlight. Julian's eyes filled with tears as he watched her approach. When they exchanged vows, they didn't speak of forever in poetic cliches. They spoke of partnership, of respect, of building a life that would continue to make a difference long after they were gone. After the ceremony, as music floated through the garden and laughter filled the air, Olivia found herself standing near the edge of the cliff, watching the horizon melt into the sea. Julian joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. She smiled, leaning into him. "About how strange life is," she said. "How a night of humiliation led to all of this. If I had known then that my greatest heartbreak would bring me here, I would have walked through it without fear." He kissed the top of her head. "That's the thing about pain," he murmured. "It breaks you open just enough for love to find its way in." As the evening faded and lanterns began to glow softly around them, the children released paper boats into the sea, each carrying a small candle, a tradition Olivia had started to symbolize dreams finding their way home. Dozens of tiny lights floated across the waves, dancing toward the horizon like stars reborn. Olivia watched them, her heart full. "That's our legacy," she said. "Not the buildings, not the awards, and those lights." Julian nodded. "Then let's keep lighting them." Years later, when people spoke of Olivia Carter Harrington, they spoke not of the woman humiliated at a gala, nor of the scandal that once shook the elite, but of the legacy she left behind, the woman who turned cruelty into compassion and pain into purpose. Her story became a reminder that dignity, once lost, can be rebuilt stronger than before, that love, when born from respect, can heal not just hearts but worlds. And every evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Julian and Olivia would stand together by the window of their seaside home, watching the sea swallow the light only to return it the next morning. Proof that no darkness lasts forever. In the quiet rhythm of the tides they found their eternity. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real one, built on belief, kindness, and a love that kept its promise of forever.